You think you can teach me about martial arts? Ryan Walsh sneered, staring down at the ordinary-looking woman in faded Target clothes. Step on this mat, and I'll show everyone why soccer moms shouldn't challenge black belts. Jessica Taylor looked exactly like what he expected. A tired nurse, worn sneakers, absolutely no threat. 40 parents pulled out their phones, anticipating a quick lesson. "This will be over in 30 seconds," Ryan announced confidently. He was right about the timing, but not the way he imagined. What happened next silenced the entire gym. Comment and let us know where you're watching from. This story will change how you see real strength. Jessica Taylor looked like any other working mother navigating the challenges of single parenthood in modern America. At 34, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing the kind of practical clothes that spoke of long shifts at the regional hospital where she worked nights as a nurse. She had moved to this small town 6 months ago, seeking a fresh start after her husband Michael's death in Afghanistan, hoping to build a peaceful life for herself and her 12-year-old daughter, Amy. The transition hadn't been easy, but watching Amy gain confidence through martial arts training had made the difficult adjustment worthwhile. Thunder Valley Martial Arts Academy buzzed with its usual Friday evening energy. 35 students of various ages filled the expansive training floor, their determined shouts echoing off the walls as they practiced kicks and punches under the watchful eye of their instructor. Ryan Walsh commanded the room with the presence of someone who had spent over a decade building his reputation as one of the area's most demanding martial arts teachers. His pristine white uniform bore not a single wrinkle, and his black belt seemed to absorb the harsh fluorescent lighting as he moved between students with calculated precision. Amy Taylor had been training here for 3 months, ever since the family moved to town. She was a naturally shy child who had struggled with confidence issues following her father's death. But martial arts seemed to be awakening something stronger within her. Jessica watched from the parent seating area as her daughter practiced basic front kicks with the kind of focused determination that reminded her so much of Michael's unwavering commitment to everything he undertook. The sight filled Jessica with both pride and a complex mixture of emotions she preferred not to examine too closely. Ryan's teaching style had caught Jessica's attention from the very first class. Though not in a positive way, she observed how he interacted differently with various students, offering encouragement and patience to some, while displaying barely concealed irritation with others. The pattern wasn't random. Jessica's trained eye, honed by years of reading opponents in professional combat, could see the subtle bias that shaped his behavior. Students of color, particularly those who struggled with techniques, faced a noticeably harsher version of his instruction, while their white counterparts received gentler correction and more opportunities to improve. Tonight proved no different. Amy was working on her front kicks when she lost her balance slightly on the follow-through, a common mistake for someone still mastering the basics. She recovered quickly and continued practicing with renewed focus. But Ryan had noticed the imperfection. He strode over with the kind of purposeful movement that drew everyone's attention, his expression already hardening with disapproval. "Stop, everyone. Look here." His voice cut through the ambient noise of training, causing the entire class to freeze mid-motion. "Amy, show everyone that kick again." His tone carried an edge that made the 12-year-old's hands tremble as she positioned herself for the demonstration. With 40 pairs of eyes suddenly focused on her, Amy's natural shyness reasserted itself, and her technique suffered under the pressure. "See this, class?" Ryan said, his voice dripping with disdain. "This is how not to execute a front kick. Weak form, no power, no focus. Some people just aren't cut out for martial arts." The words hung in the air like a physical blow, and Jessica watched her daughter's face crumple with embarrassment as several other students snickered. Nervously, a knot of discomfort tightened in Jessica's chest as she witnessed this deliberate humiliation. She had seen Ryan employ the same tactic before, Never with overtly racist language, but the pattern was unmistakable. His tone, his body language, the way he singled out students of color for public correction while offering private, gentle guidance to others. It all spoke to a bias so deeply ingrained he might not even recognize it himself. Jessica's hands clenched involuntarily beneath her jacket as she watched Amy run to the corner of the mat, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. The familiar surge of protective instinct rose within Jessica, but she forced herself to remain seated. Part of her believed that Amy needed to learn to handle pressure and criticism, that the world would not always be kind to a young woman of color, and that building resilience was important. But another part of her, the part that had spent years fighting professionally, recognized the difference between constructive challenge and deliberate cruelty. This wasn't about building character. This was about establishing dominance through intimidation, and it was being directed at vulnerable children who deserved better. Jessica rose from her seat with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to moving with purpose. Her approach across the training floor was measured and calm, but there was something in her bearing that caused conversations to fade and heads to turn. Ryan noticed her movement and paused his instruction, his expression shifting to one of barely concealed annoyance at the interruption. "Excuse me," Jessica said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet space. "Why are you humiliating my daughter?" Ryan's response was immediate and defensive, his authority challenged in front of his students and their parents. "Ma'am, this is professional training. If she can't handle real feedback about her technique, then perhaps she should consider a different activity?" His words carried the weight of someone accustomed to having his methods go unquestioned. But Jessica's steady gaze never wavered. "That wasn't feedback," she replied, her voice remaining level despite the anger building within her. "That was public shaming of a child who has been training for 3 months." The confrontation escalated quickly as Ryan's defensive posture hardened into outright aggression. Years of unchallenged authority had not prepared him for someone who would dare question his methods so directly. "I've been teaching martial arts for over a decade," he said, his voice rising to ensure the entire room could hear. "Don't lecture me about proper instruction." But Jessica wasn't backing down, and something in her unwavering composure seemed to unsettle him in a way he couldn't quite identify. "You know what?" Ryan said, his decision forming as he spoke. "Let's settle this right now. You think my methods are wrong? Prove it. Step on this mat and show me what proper technique looks like." The challenge hung in the air as 40 people held their breath, waiting to see how this ordinary-looking mother would respond to such an impossible proposition. Jessica looked at Amy, who was watching with tear-stained cheeks, then back at Ryan with a calmness that seemed almost otherworldly. "Okay," she said simply, "but when I win, you apologize to my daughter publicly." Ryan's laughter filled the room, harsh and disbelieving. "When you win, lady, you're about to learn why beginners don't challenge professionals." As Jessica prepared for what everyone expected to be a one-sided demonstration, Ryan felt a strange unease creep over him. Something in her eyes, the way she moved, the perfect posture even in this tense moment. Who was this woman, really? Have you ever underestimated someone who turned out to be completely different than they seemed? Drop your story in the comments. The transformation of Thunder Valley Academy from a routine training session into an impromptu spectacle happened with remarkable speed. Word spread quickly among the parents and students that something unprecedented was about to occur. A challenge match between their intimidating instructor and a seemingly ordinary mother. The spacious training floor became an arena as 40-plus people formed a loose circle around the central mat, their phones already emerging from pockets and purses, with the instinctive understanding that they were about to witness something that would likely become the talk of the community for weeks to come. Ryan Walsh stepped into the center of the circle with the confident swagger of someone who had never lost a public confrontation. His pristine white uniform seemed to glow under the harsh fluorescent lights, as he addressed his audience with the practiced ease of a performer who knew his role. "All right, everyone, gather around for a real lesson," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty. "Today, you'll see why martial arts requires years of dedication and discipline." He punctuated his words with a brief display of shadow boxing, his movements sharp and precise, designed to showcase the kind of technical skill that had built his reputation throughout the region. The crowd's reaction was exactly what Ryan had anticipated. Parents nodded approvingly, several students whispered excitedly to each other, and the general consensus seemed to be that this would be an educational, if somewhat one-sided, demonstration. "Mrs. Taylor here thinks she knows better than an experienced black belt instructor," Ryan continued, gesturing toward Jessica with a mixture of amusement and condescension that drew nervous chuckles from several observers. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, but also with an underlying tension that spoke to the serious nature of what was unfolding. Jessica's preparation stood in stark contrast to Ryan's theatrical display. She removed her jacket with methodical precision, folded it neatly, and placed it on a nearby bench. Her movements were economical and purposeful, lacking any trace of showmanship, but possessing a quality that drew the attention of anyone with experience in combat sports. As she tied her hair back in a simple ponytail, several parents began to notice details they had previously overlooked. The way she tested her balance, the unconscious manner in which she rolled her shoulders, the subtle positioning of her feet that spoke to muscle memory developed over years of training. Amy Taylor watched from the edge of the mat with a mixture of fear and confusion that broke Jessica's heart. "Mom, you don't have to do this for me," she whispered, as Jessica knelt beside her for a moment. "I don't care if he apologizes." But Jessica's response carried a weight of conviction that surprised even herself. "I care, sweetheart. No one should make you feel small for trying your best." The exchange was brief, but it crystallized something important for Jessica. This wasn't just about defending her daughter. It was about standing up to a pattern of behavior that she had witnessed too many times to ignore. Later that evening, long after the confrontation that would change everything, Jessica sat alone by her living room window, city lights blurring through the glass as memories she had buried for 3 years came flooding back with unexpected intensity. Shadow. That's what they used to call her in the ring. Back when she was Jessica Shadow Taylor, the defensive genius who made opponents miss by millimeters, who never threw a punch in anger, only in perfect control. The nickname had come from her ability to seem almost incorporeal during fights, slipping away from devastating attacks as if she existed in a different dimension from her opponents. Those memories brought with them the weight of everything she had lost and everything she had chosen to leave behind. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to remember the sensation of championship belts around her waist, the roar of crowds who understood they were witnessing something special, the respect she had earned through skill and discipline rather than intimidation or politics. But all of that had ended the night Michael died in Afghanistan, when a roadside bomb took away not just her husband, but her anchor to the world of professional combat sports. "I retired to protect Amy from that world," she whispered to the empty room, her voice barely audible even to herself. The world of professional fighting had given her everything: recognition, financial security, a sense of purpose. But it had also exposed her to violence and aggression that she didn't want to pass on to her daughter. She had deliberately chosen a quiet life, a normal job, a chance for Amy to grow up without the pressure and scrutiny that came with having a famous parent. "But maybe," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "maybe it's time that world protected her." Back at the academy, Ryan's confidence seemed to grow with each passing moment as he prepared for what he clearly viewed as an inevitable victory. His shadow boxing became more elaborate, his commentary more pointed as he worked to build anticipation among the spectators. "Mrs. Taylor here thinks she understands martial arts better than someone who has dedicated his life to the discipline," he said, his tone carrying just enough mock respect to seem polite while making his disdain perfectly clear. The parents, who had initially seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation, began to nod in agreement, their faith in established authority reasserting itself. Jessica's first movements on the mat immediately caught the attention of anyone with fighting experience. Her warm-up routine was oddly specific and professional for someone who was supposedly a complete amateur. The way she tested her range of motion, the unconscious manner in which she checked her balance and footwork, the natural flow of her movements all spoke to years of high-level training. A few parents exchanged glances, beginning to wonder if there might be more to this quiet nurse than met the eye. But most remained focused on Ryan's increasingly confident predictions about the outcome. The contrast between the two opponents became more pronounced as the moments passed. Ryan continued his verbal sparring with the crowd, building his narrative of professional expertise versus amateur presumption, while Jessica remained almost eerily quiet, her focus seeming to turn inward as she prepared for something that only she fully understood. When Ryan finally threw his first slow, controlled punch toward her face, designed to intimidate rather than injure, the result was immediate and startling. Jessica's head moved just enough to let the strike pass by millimeters, her response so minimal and precise that several spectators weren't sure they had seen anything at all. "Lucky reflex," Ryan commented, though his tone carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there moments before. "Let's try that again." His second attempt was a light combination: punch, cross, hook, all delivered with control but genuine technique. The result was the same. Jessica seemed to flow around the strikes like water, each movement economical and perfectly timed. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as people began to realize that what they were witnessing defied easy explanation. The mounting tension was broken by Jessica's first words since stepping onto the mat. "Ryan, you should stop now," she said, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to come from nowhere. "Before you embarrass yourself further, I'm giving you a chance to end this with dignity." But Ryan's response was to charge with everything he had, abandoning all pretense of control for raw power and aggression. For the first time since stepping onto the mat, Jessica shifted into a stance that made everyone who knew fighting freeze in recognition. Later that evening, Jessica sat alone in her bedroom, staring at a locked drawer she hadn't opened in 3 years. Inside lay something that could change everything, a piece of her past that Ryan Walsh had no idea existed. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow he would learn what happens when you pick the wrong fight. But was Jessica ready to become who she used to be? What do you think is in that drawer? Bay Stories wants to know your theories in the comments below. The transformation that occurred in Thunder Valley Academy that evening defied every expectation held by the 40-plus spectators who had gathered to witness what they assumed would be a brief and educational demonstration. Ryan Walsh, for all his bluster and confidence, found himself facing something he had never encountered in over a decade of teaching. An opponent who seemed to exist outside the normal rules of combat. His initial strikes, delivered with the kind of controlled aggression designed to establish dominance, met nothing but empty air as Jessica moved with a precision that bordered on the supernatural. What began as a confident demonstration quickly devolved into desperate aggression as Ryan threw everything he had at this seemingly ordinary woman. Wild combinations of punches and kicks, executed with the full power and technique that had built his reputation, connected with nothing more substantial than shadows. Each missed strike drew gasps from the increasingly amazed crowd, and with every passing moment, Ryan's composure cracked a little more. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, despite the fact that he hadn't landed a single blow, and his breathing grew labored from the sheer effort of attacking an opponent who seemed to predict his every move. Jessica's movement during these exchanges was unlike anything most of the spectators had ever witnessed outside of professional combat sports. She didn't dodge with the wild, panicked motions of someone overwhelmed by superior skill. Instead, she flowed around Ryan's attacks with the kind of economy of motion that spoke to years of the highest-level training. Each evasion was minimal, precise, and perfectly timed, as if she could see Ryan's intentions before he fully formed them himself. The crowd's initial murmurs of confusion gradually gave way to awed whispers as the reality of what they were witnessing began to sink in. "How is she doing that?" someone whispered from the edge of the mat, their voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet space. "She's not even trying, and he can't touch her." The question hung in the air as more people began to pull out their phones, not to record what they had expected to be Ryan's easy victory, but to capture something that defied easy explanation. A teenage student near the front of the crowd had begun typing frantically on his device, his fingers trembling as he searched for answers to questions that were only beginning to form in his mind. The first breakthrough came when his search returned results that made his eyes widen in disbelief. "Wait!" he whispered to his friend, his voice barely audible above the sound of Ryan's increasingly desperate attacks. "Let me check something." His typing became more urgent as he refined his search terms, and within moments, his screen filled with information that would change everything. Old fight footage, news articles, championship photos, all featuring a younger version of the woman who was currently making their intimidating instructor look like a rank amateur. "Look at this," the teenager said, showing his phone to the person next to him. Jessica Shadow Taylor, undefeated professional boxer, retired after husband's military death. The information spread through the crowd like wildfire, parent after parent pulling out their devices to verify what seemed impossible. Within minutes, the entire gathering had access to grainy videos of Jessica's professional fights, watching a younger version of herself dodge punches with the exact same impossible precision they were witnessing in real time. The revelation transformed the atmosphere in the academy from confusion to outright amazement. "Are you kidding me right now?" someone exclaimed, their voice carrying clearly across the mat. "A professional boxer has been sitting in our gym for 3 months, and we had no idea." The questions multiplied as more information became available. Her undefeated record, her reputation as a defensive specialist, the circumstances of her retirement following her husband's death in military service. Each new detail added another layer to the growing understanding that they were witnessing something truly extraordinary. Amy Taylor stood at the edge of the mat. Her earlier tears of embarrassment transformed into something entirely different as she watched her mother's incredible display. Reading over someone's shoulder, she learned details about her mother's past that she had never known. "Mom was a champion," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder rather than fear. "She fought on TV. She's famous." The pride in her voice was unmistakable as the full scope of her mother's hidden identity began to sink in. Meanwhile, Ryan's attacks had become increasingly wild and uncontrolled as frustration and exhaustion took their toll. What had begun as a demonstration of superior technique had devolved into something approaching desperation, as he threw every technique in his considerable arsenal at an opponent who seemed untouchable. His breathing was ragged, his movements had lost their earlier precision, and for the first time in his professional career, he found himself completely outclassed by someone he had dismissed as irrelevant. "This can't be happening," Ryan gasped between attacks, his voice carrying a note of panic that his students had never heard before. "How are you?" But Jessica offered no verbal response to his increasingly frantic questions. Her focus remained absolute. Her movement continued to flow like water around his most powerful techniques, and her expression maintained the kind of serene calm that spoke to complete mastery of the situation. The climax came when Ryan, driven by exhaustion and humiliation, threw one final desperate punch with everything he had left. It was the kind of wild, overcommitted strike that would have been devastating if it had connected. But Jessica saw it coming long before Ryan had fully committed to the movement. She had the perfect opening for a devastating counter that could have ended his career. But instead of striking back, she simply stepped aside with the same minimal movement she had displayed throughout the encounter. As Ryan's momentum carried him past her, Jessica placed the lightest possible touch on his shoulder, not to hurt him, but to demonstrate the complete control she possessed over the situation. The gentle contact was enough to send Ryan tumbling to the mat, where he lay for several seconds, staring at the ceiling as the full weight of his humiliation settled over him like a heavy blanket. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of his labored breathing and the soft rustle of clothing as 40 people shifted uncomfortably in their positions around the mat. Jessica stood calmly in the center of the training area, not even winded despite having just avoided hundreds of strikes from a skilled martial artist. Her composure was complete, her breathing steady, and her expression carried the kind of quiet authority that comes only from absolute confidence in one's abilities. "This is what real martial arts looks like," she said, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "Control, precision, using only what's necessary, never hurting someone more than you have to." The teaching moment was not lost on anyone present. Students who had witnessed Ryan's harsh treatment of struggling classmates saw firsthand what true skill looked like when it was guided by restraint and wisdom rather than ego and aggression. Parents who had accepted his methods without question found themselves reevaluating everything they thought they knew about martial arts instruction. And Ryan himself, still lying on the mat where Jessica's gentle touch had placed him, faced the crushing realization that everything he thought he knew about strength and superiority had just been turned upside down. Ryan lay on the mat, his most powerful techniques utterly useless against this ordinary-looking woman. Every strike had missed by millimeters, every combination countered with impossible precision. Around the gym, parents stared at their phones in disbelief, old fight videos playing, championship photos loading. What they found would shatter everything they thought they knew about the quiet nurse from downtown. What's the most shocking thing you've discovered about someone you thought you knew? Tell us below. The aftermath of Ryan Walsh's crushing defeat unfolded with a surreal quality that none of the witnesses would ever forget. The man who had commanded absolute authority in Thunder Valley Academy for over a decade now struggled to rise from the mat where Jessica's feather-like touch had placed him. His face burned with a combination of physical exhaustion and psychological humiliation that cut far deeper than any punch could have. The 40-plus spectators who had gathered expecting to witness his easy victory over an amateur now watched in stunned silence as he slowly got to his feet, his legs shaking not from physical damage, but from the complete destruction of his self-image. Jessica's victory had been so decisive, so effortless, and so public that there could be no question about what had transpired. Every phone in the room had captured at least part of the encounter, and the videos were already spreading beyond the gym, shared among parents, students, and soon the wider community. Ryan's attempts to regain his composure were futile. The crowd's eyes were no longer on him as the authoritative instructor, but on Jessica, who stood calmly in the center of the mat, her presence commanding a respect that needed no words. Jessica turned to Amy, who was still standing at the edge of the mat, her eyes wide with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "Sweetheart," Jessica said softly, walking over to her daughter and placing a hand on her shoulder. "This is why we train, not to hurt others, but to stand up for what's right." She then turned to Ryan, who was now standing, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "You owe my daughter an apology," she said, her voice firm but devoid of malice. "Not because I beat you, but because you humiliated her for no reason other than to feel powerful." The room waited, the tension palpable. Ryan's jaw tightened, his pride warring with the undeniable reality of his defeat. After a long moment, he nodded stiffly. "Amy," he said, his voice hoarse and barely audible, "I'm sorry for what I said. It was unfair." The apology was grudging, but it was enough. Amy nodded, her eyes shining with a newfound confidence that hadn't been there before. Jessica didn't linger to bask in her victory. She picked up her jacket, took Amy's hand, and walked out of the gym, leaving behind a room full of people grappling with what they had just witnessed. The silence broke as soon as the door closed behind her, the crowd erupting into a cacophony of whispers, exclamations, and rapid-fire discussions about who Jessica Taylor really was. That night, Jessica opened the locked drawer in her bedroom. Inside was a small, worn box containing her old boxing gloves, a faded championship belt, and a stack of newspaper clippings chronicling her career as Jessica Shadow Taylor. She hadn't touched them in 3 years, not since she walked away from the ring to protect Amy from the world that had both defined and consumed her. But as she ran her fingers over the leather of the gloves, she realized that the skills she had honed in that world had given her something she could pass on to her daughter. Not violence, but strength, discipline, and the courage to stand up to bullies. No matter how powerful they seemed, the fallout at Thunder Valley Academy was swift. Within days, parents began pulling their children from Ryan's classes, citing his unfair treatment of students and his humiliating defeat as evidence of his unfit leadership. The Academy's board, under pressure from the community, held an emergency meeting and voted to suspend Ryan pending a review of his teaching methods. A petition circulated to bring in a new instructor, one who prioritized respect and fairness over ego and intimidation. Jessica, meanwhile, was approached by several parents who begged her to teach a class of her own. At first, she hesitated, unsure if she wanted to re-enter the world she had left behind, but Amy's excitement at the idea, coupled with the memory of how her skills had protected her daughter, convinced her to agree. She started a small, inclusive class at a local community center, focusing on self-defense, confidence, and discipline, open to all students regardless of background or skill level. Amy was her first student, and the pride in her daughter's eyes as she learned from her mother was worth more than any championship belt. The story of Jessica Shadow Taylor spread far beyond the small town. Fueled by the viral videos of her showdown with Ryan, local news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a tale of a hidden champion standing up for her daughter and exposing a flawed system. Social media buzzed with discussions about underestimating others, the power of quiet strength, and the importance of standing up to unfair authority. Jessica didn't seek the attention, but she didn't shy away from it either. She used the platform to advocate for fair treatment in martial arts training and to encourage parents to teach their children resilience through respect, not fear. Ryan Walsh eventually left town, his reputation in tatters. Some said he opened a new gym in another state, but the stories of his defeat followed him, a cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance and prejudice. Thunder Valley Academy, under new leadership, implemented stricter guidelines for instructors, emphasizing inclusivity and positive reinforcement. The community, once divided by Ryan's harsh methods, began to heal, united by the example of a woman who had shown them what true strength looked like. Jessica and Amy continued their quiet life. But it was different now. Amy walked a little taller, her confidence bolstered by her mother's example and the knowledge of her legacy. Jessica, for her part, found a new purpose in teaching, passing on the lessons of her past to a new generation. The locked drawer remained open, the gloves and belt no longer relics of a life abandoned, but symbols of a strength she could share. And, in the comments of the viral videos, people from around the world shared their own stories of underestimating someone who turned out to be extraordinary. From small towns to big cities, the message was clear. Real strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits quietly, ready to step onto the mat when the moment demands it. The footage was already beginning to spread beyond the confines of Thunder Valley Academy as parents shared what they had witnessed. with friends and family members who struggled to believe. Such an account without visual proof. The woman they had all dismissed as just another suburban mother had revealed herself to be something far more extraordinary. And the implications of that revelation were only beginning to sink in. Ryan Walsh's approach to Amy Taylor required every ounce of courage he could muster. As 40 pairs of eyes tracked his movements across the mat toward the 12-year-old girl he had publicly humiliated less than an hour earlier, he got down on one knee before her, his voice barely steady. "Amy, I owe you a huge apology," he said, the words catching in his throat. "You don't deserve to be embarrassed for trying your best. Your kick was actually really good for someone who's been training only 3 months. I was wrong to make you feel bad about yourself." Amy's response carried a grace that shamed every adult present, including Ryan himself. "It's okay, Coach Ryan," she said, her voice still small but no longer trembling with fear or embarrassment. "My mom always says, everyone can learn to be better." Her simple forgiveness hit harder than any physical blow could have, and several parents found themselves wiping away tears as they witnessed this moment of genuine reconciliation between a child and the adult who had wronged her. The broader implications of Jessica's revelation spread through the crowd like ripples in a pond, as parents began to understand the full scope of what they had witnessed. The footage was already being uploaded to various platforms, and the story was beginning to take on a life of its own, as viewers struggled to process the reality of what had occurred. "Former professional boxer stops bully instructor," read one caption. "Shadow Taylor comes out of retirement for her daughter," read another. The comments that began pouring in reflected a mixture of amazement, inspiration, and validation for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of institutional authority. Jessica's true identity emerged in stages as more information became available online. She had retired 3 years earlier following her husband's death in Afghanistan, giving up an undefeated professional career to focus on raising Amy in a more peaceful environment. Her ring name, Shadow, had come from her extraordinary ability to avoid strikes that seemed impossible to dodge, a defensive skill so refined that she had gone her entire professional career without suffering a serious injury. The prize money from her final fight had been donated entirely to military families, a gesture that spoke to the character that had guided her decision to walk away from fame and fortune. Ryan's public apology expanded beyond Amy to encompass every person present in the academy that evening. "I owe everyone here an apology," he said, his voice growing stronger as he found the courage to face the full scope of his failures. "I've been teaching wrong for too long. Martial arts should build you up, not tear you down. I forgot that lesson somewhere along the way." His words carried the weight of genuine remorse, and several parents who had been considering removing their children from the program began to reconsider as they witnessed this moment of authentic self-reflection. The emotional centerpiece of the evening came when Amy's voice rang out, clear and strong, cutting through the murmur of adult conversations with the kind of pure joy that only children can express. "That's my mom, Jessica Shadow Taylor, undefeated champion." The pride in her voice was unmistakable, and her declaration seemed to transform the entire atmosphere of the gym from one of shock and confusion to one of celebration and validation. The tears that had threatened to fall from embarrassment were now flowing freely from joy and pride. Jessica's response to her daughter's announcement demonstrated the wisdom that had guided her decision to keep her past hidden for so long. "Amy, why didn't you tell me you were famous?" the girl asked, her eyes shining with newfound respect and admiration. "Because I wanted you to know me as your mom first," Jessica replied, her voice gentle but firm. "Fighting was my job. Being your mom is my life." The exchange crystallized something important for everyone present, that true strength comes not from what we can destroy, but from what we choose to protect and nurture. The immediate transformation in Thunder Valley Academy's atmosphere was palpable as Ryan began to implement changes that he should have made years earlier. "From now on, this gym is about building confidence," he announced to the assembled crowd. "Every student will be encouraged. Never torn down, Mrs. Taylor. Would you consider helping me learn better methods?" His request for guidance from the woman he had attempted to humiliate represented a complete reversal of the power dynamic that had defined the academy for over a decade. Jessica's conditions for providing assistance were simple but non-negotiable. "Only if you promise that every child gets the same respect," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned the right to make demands. "No favorites. No putting anyone down. Martial arts should make kids stronger inside and out." Her terms represented not just a change in teaching methodology, but a fundamental shift in the philosophy that would guide the academy going forward. The handshake between Jessica and Ryan that sealed their agreement was witnessed by every person present, and the symbolism was not lost on anyone. The woman he had tried to humiliate was now offering him a path to redemption, demonstrating the kind of grace under pressure that had made her a champion in the ring and would now make her a force for positive change in the community. The spontaneous applause that erupted from the crowd reflected not just admiration for Jessica's fighting skills, but respect for her character and wisdom. As the evening drew to a close and parents began to collect their children for the journey home, the conversation centered not on the spectacular display of martial arts skill they had witnessed, but on the deeper lessons about respect, humility, and the true meaning of strength. Several parents approached Jessica directly to thank her for standing up not just for Amy, but for all the children who had endured similar treatment in silence. The recognition that she had spoken for those who couldn't speak for themselves elevated her victory from a personal triumph to a community-wide moment of positive change. The revelation of Jessica's true identity had broader implications that extended far beyond the walls of Thunder Valley Academy. The story resonated with parents across the country who had struggled with similar situations, and the video footage provided a powerful example of how one person's courage to stand up against injustice could create ripple effects that transformed entire communities. The message was clear: real champions don't just win fights. They win hearts, change minds, and protect those who can't protect themselves. "Jessica Shadow Taylor," Amy's voice rang out, proud and clear. "Undefeated professional boxer. That's my mom." Ryan's face went white. Around the gym, parents frantically searched their phones, old fight videos loading, championship photos appearing on screen after screen. The woman he'd mocked, the mother he'd dismissed, the opponent he'd underestimated was a legend. But why had she hidden her identity for so long? And what would she do now that the secret was out? Why do you think Jessica kept her fighting career secret? Bay Stories is curious about your theories in the comments. The transformation of Thunder Valley Academy in the 4 hours following Jessica Taylor's revelation represented just the beginning of a much larger movement that would ultimately affect martial arts instruction throughout the region. The video footage of her encounter with Ryan Walsh spread across digital platforms with the kind of viral intensity reserved for content that touches something deep in the collective consciousness, reaching 8 million views within the first day, and generating thousands of comments from viewers who saw their own experiences reflected in Amy's humiliation and Jessica's response. The comments section became a forum for parents to share their own stories of children who had been subjected to similar treatment by coaches and instructors who confused intimidation with motivation. "This is what every parent dreams of doing," wrote one viewer, whose sentiment was echoed by hundreds of others who had watched their children's confidence eroded by adults who should have been building them up. "Jessica Taylor is a legend," posted another, capturing the feeling of countless viewers who saw in her actions the kind of principled stand they wished they had the courage and ability to take themselves. Ryan Walsh's transformation in the aftermath of his humbling was as dramatic as it was genuine, representing the kind of fundamental change in perspective that can only come from being forced to confront the full extent of one's failures. He spent hours studying positive coaching methods. Watching educational videos about child psychology and sports instruction, and reading testimonials from students who had thrived under encouraging rather than intimidating teaching styles. I watched our video 100 times, he confided to Jessica during one of their planning sessions. I was horrified at myself. You showed me what real strength looks like. The immediate changes Ryan implemented at Thunder Valley Academy were comprehensive and immediate. Public criticism of students was completely eliminated in favor of individual feedback sessions that focused on improvement rather than failure. The celebration of effort over perfection became a cornerstone of the new teaching philosophy, and personal apologies to students he had treated harshly were delivered with the same sincerity that had characterized his public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Other parents started speaking up about their experiences, Ryan noted, as he described the ripple effects of the changes. Word spread to other gyms about what happened here, and I became an example of how people can change. Jessica's reluctant acceptance of a consulting role at the academy reflected her growing understanding that her actions had created an opportunity to influence positive change on a scale she had never anticipated. I see how much this means to the kids, she explained to Amy one evening as they discussed the new responsibilities that had emerged from that fateful Friday night. If I can help create a better environment for children to learn and grow, then I have an obligation to do so. Her teaching philosophy emphasized building confident humans rather than training fighters, with every technique lesson accompanied by discussions about respect, self-control, and the responsible use of physical skills. The impact of Jessica's story extended far beyond Thunder Valley Academy as other martial arts. Schools throughout the region began to examine their own practices in light of the attention her case had generated. 3 local gyms reached out directly to request guidance on improving their teaching methods, with their owners acknowledging that they had witnessed the kind of behavior Ryan had displayed but had never taken steps to address it. We heard what happened at Thunder Valley, one instructor wrote in his initial contact. Can you help us make sure we never have a situation like this? We never want another child to experience what Amy went through. The formation of a parent network dedicated to addressing problematic coaching practices represented another significant outcome of Jessica's actions. Parents who had previously felt isolated in their concerns about their children's treatment found strength in numbers as they began to organize and advocate for positive changes in youth sports instruction. Jessica started something bigger than she realized, noted one parent coordinator. We have a support group now for parents dealing with difficult coaches, and we won't stay silent anymore when we see problems. Amy Taylor's personal growth in the months following her mother's revelation demonstrated the positive effects that can emerge when children see their parents take principled stands against injustice. Her confidence in martial arts training increased dramatically as she began helping younger students who were struggling with basic techniques, often repeating the lesson her mother had taught her. Being strong means helping others feel strong too. Her transformation from a shy, intimidated student to a confident leader among her peers reflected the kind of positive change that Jessica had hoped to achieve. The broader media coverage of Jessica's story resonated with audiences far beyond the martial arts community, as news outlets recognized the universal themes of standing up to bullying and the power of individual action to create systemic change. Local television interviews focused not on Jessica's fighting skills, but on her motivation and message, with reporters consistently asking what had driven her to take such a dramatic stand. Every parent's instinct is to protect their child, she responded in one widely circulated interview. I just happen to have skills most parents don't. But the courage to speak up, that's something every parent possesses. The recognition Jessica received from community leaders reflected the broader impact of her story on conversations about child welfare and adult responsibility. The City Council presentation, where she was honored for outstanding service to youth development and demonstrating true community leadership, drew an audience that included parents, educators, and youth advocates who saw her story as an example of how individual courage could create positive change. The awards ceremony became an opportunity to discuss broader issues of respect, equality, and the importance of adults modeling the behavior they wanted to see in children. Ryan's own journey of redemption continued to evolve as he embraced his role as an example of how people could acknowledge their mistakes and work to make amends. "Jessica didn't just defeat me," he reflected during a later interview about his transformation. "She saved me from becoming someone I wouldn't have been able to live with. I was losing students and losing respect, but more importantly, I was losing myself." His willingness to discuss his failures publicly provided encouragement for other instructors who recognized similar patterns in their own behavior. The underground network of former fighters and combat sports professionals who began sharing Jessica's story represented an unexpected dimension of its impact, as athletes who had known her during her professional career reached out to express their admiration for her post-retirement actions. Mixed martial artists, boxers, and trainers from across the country posted their own commentary on her video, with many noting that her behavior exemplified the values that combat sports were supposed to teach. "Shadow Taylor was always about respect in the ring," wrote one former opponent. "This is exactly what our sport needs more of." The video was already spreading beyond the gym walls. Somewhere across town, another martial arts instructor paused mid-lesson as the footage played on his phone. He recognized Jessica immediately. They'd fought on the same card years ago in Las Vegas. "No way," he whispered. "Shadow Taylor is back." Word was spreading through a network Jessica didn't even know existed. Former fighters, retired champions, and people who remembered what she represented. What would happen when they all learned where she was? Do you think Jessica's past will bring more trouble or more allies? Share your predictions below. The transformation of Thunder Valley Academy in the year following Jessica Taylor's revelation represented more than just the rehabilitation of a single instructor or the improvement of one martial arts program. It became a model for positive change that influenced youth sports instruction throughout the region and beyond. The Academy's student retention rate became the highest in the area, with a waiting list of 60-plus children whose parents specifically sought out the respectful, confidence-building environment that had emerged from the ashes of Ryan Walsh's former intimidation-based teaching style, the complete absence of bullying. Incidents in the 12 months following Jessica's intervention stood as testament to the power of principled leadership and the willingness of people to change when shown a better way. Ryan's personal transformation continued to deepen as he embraced his new role as an advocate for positive coaching practices throughout the martial arts community. His measure of success shifted fundamentally from the fear and submission he had once demanded from students to the confidence and joy he now saw in their faces as they mastered new techniques in an environment of encouragement and support. "I measure success differently now," he reflected during a regional conference where he shared his story with other instructors. "Not by how tough I can be on students, but by how much confidence I can help them build. Every child who walks through our doors should leave feeling stronger and more capable than when they arrived." The Taylor approach, as it came to be known throughout the martial arts community, represented a formalization of the teaching philosophy that Jessica had developed during her own competitive career and refined through her experience as a mother. The principles she helped establish: respect, first instruction, celebration of effort over perfection, strength used to protect rather than intimidate, treatment of mistakes as learning opportunities, and the cultivation of mutual support among students, were adopted by 20-plus schools across 3 states. The program's success lay not in any revolutionary technique, but in its recognition that martial arts training should build character alongside physical skill. Amy Taylor's evolution from a shy, intimidated student to a confident leader among her peers illustrated the profound impact that positive change could have on young people when adults committed to doing better. Now wearing a green belt earned through dedicated practice in an environment of encouragement rather than fear, she had begun helping younger students who struggled with basic techniques. often repeating the lessons her mother had taught her about using strength to help others rather than to dominate them. Her transformation from victim to advocate represented the kind of generational change that Jessica had hoped to achieve through her intervention. The partnership between Jessica and Amy in co-teaching basic self-defense classes reflected both the healing that had occurred within their family and the expansion of Jessica's influence beyond the boundaries of traditional martial arts instruction. These sessions, designed for families who wanted to learn together, emphasized not just physical techniques, but the importance of communication, mutual respect, and the responsibility that came with possessing the ability to protect oneself and others. "Everyone deserves to feel safe," Jessica would tell each new group of students, "and everyone deserves to know that they have the power to stand up for what's right." The recognition Jessica received from regional and state organizations reflected the broader impact of her story on conversations about child welfare, positive coaching, and the power of individual action to create systemic change. Her selection as Community Hero of the Year, Youth Advocate, and Positive Role Model represented acknowledgement not just of her fighting skills, but of her wisdom in using those skills to create rather than destroy. The awards ceremonies became opportunities for her to share her message with ever wider audiences, emphasizing that real champions are defined not by their ability to defeat opponents, but by their commitment to building up others. Ryan's own recognition as Transformed Instructor of the Year represented a different but equally important kind of success story, demonstrating that people could acknowledge their failures, learn from their mistakes, and emerge as positive forces for change. His invitation to share his journey at coaching workshops and instructor training seminars provided hope for other teachers who recognized similar patterns in their own behavior. From Harsh to Helpful, A Teacher's Journey became the title of his presentation, and his willingness to discuss his failures publicly encouraged others to examine their own practices with honesty and courage. The ripple effects of Jessica's story continued to expand throughout the broader sports community as coaches in soccer, swimming, gymnastics, and other disciplines began to adopt similar approaches to instruction. The recognition that encouragement worked better than intimidation, that building confidence was more important than breaking down resistance, and that positive coaching created better athletes and better people, became widespread enough to influence policy discussions at state and national levels. Parent empowerment groups cited Jessica's example as proof that individual voices could create meaningful change when backed by courage and principle. The personal fulfillment Jessica found in her new role as an advocate for children and positive coaching practices provided a sense of purpose that had been missing from her life since Michael's death and her retirement from professional fighting. "I found my calling after boxing," she reflected during a later interview. "Protecting kids turns out to be more important than any championship I ever won. Every child who feels safe while learning, every student who discovers their own strength in an environment of respect and encouragement, that's a victory that matters more than anything I achieved in the ring." The wisdom she had gained through her journey from professional fighter to protective mother to community advocate was crystallized in her philosophy about the true nature of strength and success. "I stopped boxing because I'd proven everything I needed to prove to myself," she explained to a gathering of parents and educators. "But I'll never stop fighting for kids who need someone in their corner." Real champions don't just win fights. They win hearts, change minds, and protect those who can't protect themselves. The most important battles aren't fought in rings or gyms. They're fought in moments when someone decides to stand up and say, "Enough." The legacy of that Friday evening at Thunder Valley Academy continued to grow as more people learned about the power of individual courage to create positive change. Amy Taylor, now 13 and confidently leading warm-up exercises for 30 students who learned respect alongside technique, represented the future that Jessica's actions had helped create. When new, nervous students entered the gym, they were immediately welcomed by classmates who had learned that strength meant helping others rather than intimidating them. creating an environment where nobody was left behind or embarrassed for trying their best. 1 year later, Jessica Taylor had become something she never expected. A symbol, not just of fighting skill, but of standing up when it mattered most. But legends, once awakened, rarely sleep again. In a small gym 3 states away, another instructor was making another child cry. Another parent was staying silent, afraid to speak up, until they heard about what happened at Thunder Valley Academy. Shadow was coming for them too. Would you want Jessica Taylor to visit your local gym? Bay Stories wants to hear about coaches who need to learn this lesson in the comments below. If this story inspired you, hit that like button. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.